Hi there to all the early birds. Just so you know, we'll get started in just a few minutes. I will be right back around a little bit after 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and we'll get through this stuff. I'm very excited for this webinar. There's going to be a lot of fun concepts we're going to introduce, and I'll give another announcement in a few minutes. Hi, everyone. For anybody new coming in, just so you know, we are going to start a little bit after 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So it's going to be in about 5 minutes. Just as a quick check, if you can all hear my voice, please drop a comment in the chat just so I know. And if you're encountering any other issues, I'd be happy to get that squared away before the webinar starts. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. For some of the new entrants that are coming in the room, just so you know, we're going to get started in about 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to give a few more minutes to those who are still logging in. If you have any questions that you want to ask before the webinar starts, feel free to drop it in the chat. Thank you. All right, so we are at 3:01 Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to go ahead and begin the webinar content just about now. Thank you everyone for joining. Allow me to turn my camera on too. My name is Andrew. I'm going to give a much more full introduction to all this stuff in just a moment. But I was actually thinking about this presentation a few minutes before we started, and I'm actually going to start this a different way and circle back. So I'm going to start this webinar with a question. Any of you who have been involved in the world of virtual learning over the past year and a half or so know there is nothing worse in the world than talking into the dark void that is Zoom, especially when there isn't a whole lot of participation from those who are on the other side of the screen. So I'm going to try to change that a little bit, and I'm going to skip ahead and then I'll come back to the original slides that went past. But before I even do any introductions, I'd like to start with this question for you all. Allow you to think about it a little bit while I introduce some of the initial parts of this webinar, and we'll circle back to this to see how this fits in with some current trends and some future ideas that you can implement. So for all of you just joining as well, I'd like you to post your answer to this question in the comments. This will form the basis of a lot of our discussion today, and let me go ahead and read it. So, what should the middle and high school experience do to prepare students for the next step in their post K-12 career? So I'd like everyone to just take a moment and think about it for a little bit, write an answer into the chat. The Q&A section, the chat section are both okay. We'll be able to see it here. But ultimately, today, we really want to present some new ideas that are happening in the world of, it's actually a really exciting time to be involved with this, with connecting people with their future careers and how we can do that. So once again, one last time, what should the middle and high school experience do to prepare students for the next step in their post K-12 career? So purposely keeping that very open, just want to hear what your thoughts are, and then we're going to digest a lot of this and break down some of the pieces throughout the course of the next 20 or 30 minutes. So with that in mind, let me go back and I will do the introductions while you're thinking about all that stuff. So once again, welcome and thank you for participating in our Pave Your Pathway webinar today. So my name is Andrew Bannish. I am a product manager here at NeuroMaker STEM. I'll do a little bit more of a official introduction in just a moment, but just to introduce us as a whole, I represent NeuroMaker, which is one of the departments of BrainCo. So our company started off in the Harvard iLab. We're now, like all over the world and have tons of the team members all over the place. We're actually one of the top 10 brain-machine interface technology companies in the world. They've been featured in publications by MIT and NASA, and we've been all involved in the in-tech business ever since we started. And I'd be happy to give more intros on that if you need it. You might also notice from the tone of my voice and how I'm stumbling over things that I'm a bit under the weather today. I apologize if I'm not as perky as I normally am. And just so you know, if things start to get a little iffy, I might switch to a commercial or something like that. But this is one of my favorite subjects, so this is actually giving me a lot of energy right now. So bringing it up to me, so I will do a very brief introduction. So my name is Andrew. I've been involved in international education ever since my very first job. I started off as an ESL teacher, got involved with a bunch of crazy stuff, and eventually managed the first robotics program in China for about 5 years. So serving 40,000 students from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade and getting them excited and moving forward in their STEM careers. I finished my master's at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in Technology, Innovation, and Education. And now I'm a product manager here at NeuroMaker. And I have a really cool job, which is I get to talk to a lot of people who are smarter than me. And we get to figure out how we can embed new technologies into education and open up new career opportunities for students all over the world. So that's a little bit about me. So what I'd like to talk about today. So this is one of my favorite topics, which is really what the spirit of education should be moving forward. Like, what do we want to, what kind of goals do we want to set for our students? How do we get there? What are some best practices that we can implement? I realize that many of you, speaking from an educational point of view, the last thing that we need is to, I feel like my heart sinks whenever some really new thing comes out or a new piece of technology gets on my desk and go like, oh, I got to learn a whole other thing. That's not really the way I like to work. Where I think it's not worth breaking down everything that we put together and rebuild it again from scratch. I think there's a lot of great things we're doing now, and there's just some other practices that we could use to augment that in a way that like we can create something sustainable. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit. And where we're going to really talk about today is pathways programs. So bridging the gap between secondary education and the big world of careers out there. A lot of really cool research going on in this space right now. Actually, some of the things I'm going to discuss today are some of the pieces that I've worked on with some of the professors at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It's a really exciting time. There's all kinds of cool technologies and programs. So we don't have a ton of time, but we'll talk about a few of those things here today. So what I'll do first is just talk a little bit about what pathways are and what their basic history is. History has a kind of a tendency to repeat itself. So, I think looking to the past a little bit can kind of inform us what our future might look like. I'd like to break down some basics in pathways. This is not meant to be a seminar on telling you everything about pathways and how they're designed now. I just want to use that as really a device to talk about the future. And then our third point, I really want to turn everything on its head and really talk about some of the new research that's being done and some of the new programs that are in place to better connect students to their future careers in the education space, especially within secondary institutions. Although this gets blurred across some lines in college and technical schools and stuff like that. So we'll break down a little bit. Finally, I have some takeaways for consideration. So just some quick kind of mental thoughts that you can jot down so that you can leave here with some ideas for continuing this discussion or implementing something in your learning environment. And then finally, some time for Q&A. One last personal note, I am not a believer in really long-winded presentations. So I've kept this relatively short to around 20, 25 minutes. Hopefully I don't get too excited and talk your ear off. But please, I'd love to hear whatever your questions or concerns are in real time. So whatever you'd like to share with the group, feel free. And also, if you have anything else that you'd like to add, I'd love to promote you to a panelist and kind of bring you on to say some words too. So please make this as interactive as you'd like it to be. So now let's go back to the original question that I posed. I see a couple of things in the chat. So let's go ahead and hear some answers from the group on this question. So once again, for anybody just joining in, I'd like to hear from you all. And this is your personal opinion. What should the middle and high school experience do to prepare students for the next step in their post K-12 career? So here we go. I'm going to read a few of these out loud. So let's see here. I have real job and industry experience. Love that. So another one, they should be able to think and problem solve so they can do anything. Yes. I've introduced students to STEM careers that don't exist with 2 exclamation points. That's a lot of emphasis. We got another one, work on real products, not pipe cleaners and blocks. Sounds good. And then provide students with a collaborative experience in a variety of fields. So this is the pretty good indicator for kind of where we want to push forward. What I did not hear in there, which is very indicative, is nobody talked about getting high grades. Nobody talked about going to a fancy school. Like nobody talked about, filling out a credit evaluation form. So I think ultimately what we can all safely assume is that, we really want to get students to think about where they want to move in the future and provide them with the essential toolbox to get there. So there's some more kind of technical ways that we can unpack that, but let's take a look at what some of those answers look like after we go through a few of these slides. So let's go ahead. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history, like I mentioned before. Once again, I want to keep this pretty brief, so you're not here for a history lesson, but I thought this might be a fun way to kickstart this. So even just thinking about the role of secondary school, so middle and high school, you might have thought of it as a place where, I know I certainly did, where teachers got spitballs thrown at them, which was very unwarranted, and feel bad to this day about that. I'm sorry, Mr. Weston, you didn't deserve those things. I was just a very hormone-crazed student. And a lot of this is, doing a lot of classes that are kind of prescribed by some kind of a district, following some kind of rubric that came from a higher level organization. I realized that there's a lot of tension and friction that happens when educators want to implement a new program or take on a new pedagogy. And what I thought might be really interesting is just to take a look back to see, you can see my last point on here is, we've been through all this before. everything that we're talking about with revitalizing education and, school districts talking about how they want to completely change the game. This is nothing new. This has been going on for hundreds of years. So actually, just to kickstart this off, you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, this is what probably your high school looks like, or secondary school. The big high school push really came at the turn of the 20th century. And actually prior to World War II, actually less than half of the US population even graduated from a high school. So my grandparents, I'm sure you have similar stories too. My grandfather never went beyond 8th grade, and my grandmother never went beyond 10th grade, so she didn't even finish high school. And all this stuff is very new, and particularly in that time and era, high school was really the terminal point for where people would go off into their career. So from its very genesis, secondary school was supposed to be a way for people to gain the essential skills and trade skills and cognitive skills, emotional skills, so that they could enter the workforce and be productive. So college wasn't even a part of the equation then. And even what's more interesting is, you hear all these teachers and, well, not even teachers, but superintendents and think tanks and political organizations saying, the American curriculum is failing us and students aren't being served well. Allow me to introduce this exact same conversation that happened around the 1880s. So actually up until the 1880s, high schools didn't even have the typical science classes and math classes that we do now. They actually had what was called the classical curriculum. So what they learned was things like Latin and philosophy, things that you would learn in maybe a liberal arts degree in college. And it was really meant to be a program to set elite people up for college. So if they were to move on to like an Ivy League school or something like that. And it wasn't until the turn of the century that what was then called the scientific curriculum came about. Some people called it the English curriculum, other people called it the modern curriculum, and that was introducing radical things back then, like biology classes and the CTE programs that we know today. So when you really think about the long span of education over thousands of years, everything that we're talking about, even revolutionizing now, is still very new. It's often in living memory. Like, you can find people that went through all this stuff. And when we talk about pathways and connecting careers with students, that didn't even really start until about 1918. There was a seminal work done called the Cardinal Principles of Secondary Education that introduced what they called tracking, and what we today would probably call a pathways program, which was, identifying certain careers in the workforce, filtering down how to introduce students to that kind of industry with some skills to move on from that, back, right after World War I. So the only point I want to make here is that this is nothing new. The tribulations that we're all going through now have happened before, and it shouldn't be anything that we should be afraid of. This is just part and parcel of the way the system works. So, like anything that we're looking to put forth for the future, we know that people had to deal with this in the past. So now, fast forwarding today, let's just talk about what a current pathway program is and what the pieces of that are. And I added in a couple notes on kind of what I've seen that work in the current format of pathways programs. So I have very audaciously copy and pasted this from the Pathways Wisconsin website. So I'm based here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and proud blue collar tradition here of making sure that students are ready for the workforce right after secondary school. And this is probably familiar to what you see in your pathways programs today, which is ultimately is connecting secondary school students with a kind of post-secondary option that can then take them into a career. So I personally like to digest this backwards. So starting with what the career is, what the post-secondary option for that is, and then finally how we can make these pieces connect together in secondary school. So let's go ahead and digest that a little bit, and then I'll provide us with a great springboard to some frameworks where we can think about what the future of this will look like. So working backwards, the career ladder. So once again, here's some screenshots from the Wisconsin website. So this is for the construction track that they have. So first of all, and this is just a best practice for any school implementing a pathway program, pathways are by definition a path to something else, right? So we really want to set up a path to some kind of endpoint that we want to get our students to. So in this case, we're starting with the careers that we want students to take on. So, what kind of professions do we want to see students engaged with? What's the ROI for these kind of investments? Students are going to have to put in time, effort, and very often some kind of money to see themselves in that kind of a career. And some of the things that I like about the pathway programs that are existing now is you can see here from some of the highlights that they've taken together. You feel free to Google this. They have a lot of great resources. This is not meant to be a very targeted, or how should I say this, a very specific endpoint. We're not going to say, hey, you're going to work a lathe in a factory at some point in the future. Like, we can really build out this system so that students can see themselves within a broader range of different career options. So anything from the entry level to the semi-skilled positions to something on the professional side, people can kind of put themselves into a career mindset and see all the possibilities that can come out of their time. So working backwards, we start from career. Any program that you put in place from a pathways perspective, you're probably going to have to fill out some kind of state paperwork. So this is all a part of the normal system. But really, I think from a more higher level point of view, we can really look at this as, where do we want our students to be when they have completely exited the current education system and are taking forth in their future career? So that's where the endpoint of this looks like. So continuing to work backwards, what kind of post-secondary places do we want to get our students to so they can realize that kind of career option? Well, as you can see here, this can be anything from entry-level work to technical colleges to universities. So actually, a lot of our work here at NeuroMaker isn't just creating curriculum for schools to operate. It's really about helping to provide this kind of a lens for students and educators to look through on what they can do in the post-secondary environment to make those career options more digestible and approachable than they might have been before. So some questions that we always ask during this process are, what's realistic for people out there? Like, what is the best local connection that we can make to industries in the area? Based on the educational research, a lot of people leaving the post-secondary environment to go straight into career are probably going to be doing something more local. And then, of course, where's their cross synergy? So where we like to ask, what kind of things are going to be sustainable, and where can we, if you're putting a lot of investments together in personnel to organize these activities and people to run certain technology, you want those people to stay and you want these programs to continue and grow. So those are just some of the questions that we typically ask. And then finally, like, where this becomes a lot more relevant to the school environment is, what do we do in our secondary institutions to connect those two pieces that we just talked about? So, everything from industry recognized certifications, college credit opportunities, work-based learning programs, and even just basic skill building in school. And like I said, there's a couple of questions on the left that kind of hammer in our scope so that we can make this more realistic for wherever we're based in the world. But ultimately, like, as you can see here, like, the big point that I want to make is this is really more of a process to get students to think about where they want to move in their career and give them just enough so that they can realize that no matter where their future career takes them. So that's how it currently works now. And what I'd like to transition into is kind of where the research is indicating this system should move in, and some really cool ideas that have come out that put these pieces together in a more unique way. So future trends, there we go. Look at that. I did the transition without even seeing the slide. So these things are really cool. I'm not even going to try to contain my excitement. I think these two examples are really fun, even just to look at from a theoretical lens. So the first one on the left is the 60-year curriculum. So this is a work created by Professor Chris Deedy and John Richards, who are based at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I hate to be biased, but I did get to take a bunch of their classes, and they have some really exciting research going on there. And I'm going to unpack a lot of that in the next slide. But ultimately, this is a framework for having students think about not just going to school and then going into career. It's really about becoming and realizing that a career in the future is going to be paired inseparably throughout their entire working life with learning new skills and new trades. I think it's very, very rare for anybody out there in the world, and feel free to drop a comment if you agree or disagree with this. It's very rare for somebody to leave university or high school or whatever and have all the skills they need to realize their career potential. People are going to coding boot camps. People are actually, my girlfriend right now is doing that right now. She's doing a big career transition, as a lot of people are in this post-COVID days. So Chris Dede here puts together a wonderful framework on kind of realizing that and like how this is happening in the world right now. And what is really cool about this is this book came out about two years ago or so. This term 60-year curriculum wasn't really spoken about that much. Now, if you Google it, it's in white papers from colleges and high schools, like all over the place. So this is just starting to really reach its crescendo. So it's a great time to be thinking like that. And the second, I think this is amazing. And I'll give you a little piece of this in the webinar today, but I heavily encourage you to take a look at some of the principles that they put together. The Stanford Open Loop University. So this is a university framework, but I believe that a lot of the examples that you can take from this are going to be directly applicable to a secondary environment. And this just does a great job kind of looking at what the 60-year curriculum principles are, and then seeing how people can make changes to the education system, some ways that are kind of far-fetched, other ways they're a bit more digestible, so that you can have these structures available for students in the future. So I'm going to save that excitement for when that slide comes up, but think about a 60-year curriculum, a great framework to work around, in the Stanford Open Loop University is one actual practice being developed now to meet that need. So let's go ahead and digest this a little bit. So what the 60-year curriculum really talks about is, and I'm sure this is something that we all, I feel like educational research is a wonderful place for people to see what works in practice and then to see if it works in theory. A lot of it is putting on fancy terminology to things that people already realize and know. So a lot of this stuff will sound very obvious, but I think the frameworks put in place are really helpful. So K-12 and additional schooling, whether that be technical school or college or whatever, it's typically not enough for people to keep up for whatever their career is. If you look at the span of any career right now, people are probably going to be switching jobs every 3 to 5 years at a minimum. They're going to be doing all kinds of different industries over the course of their life, and finishing school at one point and then jumping off into the workforce is not going to be something that is going to set up students for success the best way. So one of the big takeaways that we really work on with this is learners really need to develop that sense of agency. This is probably something that gets thrown around in a bunch of professional development seminars that like we're all listening into, but it's really about students taking their own, like building up the cognitive and emotional skills necessary to guide their own learning and their own careers. I think one of the silver linings of what happened with COVID over the past couple of years is that didactic instruction. So unfortunately, what you're dealing with right now, somebody talking to you and expecting you to learn a bunch of stuff, regurgitate a bunch of test answers, is not the way the workplace works, and is not going to get students into a very independently minded, self-driven educational mindset. So educators, industry, and learners need to build lifelong systems to upskill as needed. So where we want to see our secondary schools work into the system, at least from a theoretical frame point, is going to be building up those essential mix of soft skills, cognitive skills, and a few select hard skills that can get them to their next goal. And then from there, students will be able to have the skill set necessary to adjust as needed. And there's some really cool frameworks that you can work around with this. There's some interesting ways that you can combine existing resources at your school or wherever you're based to kind of make this really open up as a flowing loop. So it's not, students don't need to think of school as something that you just finish and then you're done. It's really something that you want to engage with, and it's something that you want to stay with you as you move forward in your career. So let's see one solid example of that. So here is the Stanford Open Loop University. This thing is so cool. I know I've already said it a couple of times now, but it truly is really cool. And this squiggly line graphic, I think, is a perfect example of what a lot of educational paths look like for students. So if you look on the left side, this is typically what we see from somebody moving into a professional career, likely something that everyone on this webinar did, which is that your education is typically front-loaded. So the K-12 system is going to go pretty much until you're 18 years old. then you might go to college, you might go to technical school, and then you work in the workforce. So you'll see here, you see all this K-12 stuff is indicated here, maybe some college at the tail end of this. Then you go into the workforce, you're working for a couple of years, you see what happens. Maybe you find something you like, and then you either upskill in a trade program, maybe you join an apprenticeship, or maybe you go to grad school. You have this little bump here then, but then that's it. And then pretty much the way our educational system works now is you're off on your own. If you got to figure something out, then you got to figure it out yourself. You got to go find a private organization to help train you, or hope that your company will help you with that kind of stuff. So it's very limiting, right? And I think it puts people in the wrong mindset where education can't just be something that you finish at some point and then it's over. You never have to open up a book again or whatever. I think we all know that's not true. And I think the real career paths that we're taking look a lot more like the squiggly line. Based on my experience, if you all want to grab a beer with me at some point and hear about the tribulations of life that I've experienced, I'm sure we all have. Career paths often look like this wild squiggly line, which is that, you learn a little bit here and then, maybe in high school you didn't apply yourself that much, or maybe you found yourself really active and then like things trailed off a little bit once you move into your next thing. And then the industry that you're working in collapsed and you have to reskill into something else. You have to balance a bunch of other life priorities. So that's really what I think a modern career path is going to look like. So how does this relate into an actual example? So I'll share a couple of details here, and then I'm going to play a quick video for you all. It's only 2 minutes, so hopefully it's not too much for everybody here to digest. But what the open loop program at Stanford is piloting is, instead of front loading a undergraduate educational experience, and once again, this is for college. However, I think a lot of these learnings are filtering into, like typically what starts at a higher level will filter into, other post-secondary institutions, secondary ones, and then, down it goes, excuse me. What Stanford is piloting is a 6-year program. So let's say you finish high school, you get accepted in the Stanford open loop program. You have 6 years of college that you can cash in at any point over your lifetime. So that, let's say you decide, hey, I'm really interested in, I don't know, computer science, or maybe it's accounting or whatever. I'm just going to go to school for 2 years, learn the basic skills of the trade, and then jump into the workforce and see how I like it. Then you figure out, oh, I like it a lot. I'm going to come back to school for another 2 years or whatever, and then like upskill so that I can become a lot more engaged in that industry. Or maybe you realize, hey, this isn't the career for me. I'm going to come back and try something different. So the point is that you have educational backing over the course of your entire professional career that you can exchange at different times. This also begins at different ages. So people who get accepted to this program don't have to be straight out of high school. They can be people who are farther along in their careers or even earlier. And there's a lot of really cool mechanisms that they've used to power this kind of educational materials, so that you have different credentialing systems and different alumni groups. So it's something that really reflects the career paths that we're taking. It's not something that you just do and finish. It's something that really follows you throughout the course of your passions and where the industry is moving, so that you can stay up to speed with things and keep up with current trends. So now I'm going to go ahead and open up this website that they have. So I encourage everyone here, if you're interested, to take a look at this yourself. If you want to see what some of these frameworks are in action, it's truly amazing. And what's really cool about the way that they did it is they do this from the perspective of the future, looking back. So I'm going to go ahead, play this video very quickly. Let me know if the sound comes through or not. If not, I'll just talk you through it. It's only about 2 minutes long, so give me just one moment. Can you hear that? Got it. Okay, so realize the sounds are coming in. No worries. I'm going to narrate this as it comes in. I think that will guide you through the pieces here. So give me just 1 second. There we go. Okay, so what's happening in this video is we're doing a look back. So for the Stanford Open Loop University program, we're looking at current career trends right now. And as you can see from the graphics on the screen, in the past, a person would have to go to a 4-year college and have everything front loaded. So that, as you can see in this little car, somebody gets ready to go into the workforce, but then when they encounter a certain issue, like they will when they hit that box, they don't have the frameworks and the educational pieces necessary to overcome that barrier. So say, for instance, your industry fell apart or you want to make a career change, there's no frameworks in place for that right now. But as time goes on, in this new system that they've developed, Stanford Open Loop University, they've put together things like micro-credentials, which are things where you can gain a credential in a certain skill set in less than 4 years. Often, many of them only take a semester, or some are even half a semester. So say, for instance, you want to learn a new programming language, or you want to gain some new skill in accounting or whatever it may be, that you can do that. And then you can go off into the workforce and come back. And then what's great about this program too, is their alumni network is made up of the students who are engaging this over the course of their full career. So that as people leave the schooling that they do and whatever parcels that they do for it, they can come back and then be mentors for people who are engaging on a new career path. And they can have more of that open loop feel than it would be if you were to do a 4-year program, leave, and then try to reconnect with alumni. I'm sure all of us who have been into any high school or college environment know that alumni meetups aren't exactly something that's powering a lot of career moves. But I'll leave a lot of this for you all to kind of self-discover on your own. But you can kind of see here how they have, I think they've done a great job communicating these concepts very well. And then you can see some of the frameworks that they've put together to kind of change the way that people are thinking about learning, so that these concepts can be a lot more approachable. So I really wanted to use this as a device to kind of talk about how we can apply some of these concepts in secondary schools. So to speak a little bit to that, here's just a few other facts that they've put together in their programming that we like to live here within our educational experiences at NeuroMaker. So number one, and once again, this is for college, but a lot of this stuff can be derived into tangible instances into secondary school. Number one, this program doesn't have majors, so students declare a mission. So instead of choosing, hey, I'm going to major in accounting over my 4 years, instead it's, I'm going to choose a problem in society or some kind of a mission that I want to solve. So for instance, if you get accepted to this program, it's going to say, hey, I want to help water quality around the world. So that's not set around some kind of a, an academic field that we would know today. It's really centering students towards building up the skills and the network around that kind of social problem, so that people aren't, they're doing everything very problem-based, like we say a lot in our curriculum, but is something that people actually declare as their major. So it's a mission instead. Number two, credits are not really a thing. It's about skills. So it's about what skills have you demonstrated, and basically, can you actually do it? So I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody here that people who pass a certain college test or go through a high school class, it's not indicative necessarily of how well they can do something. It's normally a pass-fail or you get a grade letter. In this instance, it's very skills-based. So it's either like you can do these certain things or you can't. Number three, there's no real such thing as graduation. It's more of iteration, so that when you finish a certain step of the program, this sets you up for a certain kind of new experience, but you can always come back to upskill from there. So like one thing that I think graduation does, whether it's from high school or from college, is it gives students the mindset that everything's done. So in this case, they've abandoned that. And it's meant to be something that you loop into whenever you need it in your career. And then number four, alumni in this program are partners in the community itself. So, if you're engaging in some sort of trade, people are constantly coming back to work with you to enter new career fields or get new perspectives. So it's really neat. So I'll leave it to you to kind of investigate a bit more. Feel free to Google Stanford Open Loop University. And even within that, they give a bunch of frameworks on like what that kind of learning can look like in all kinds of different educational environments. But I think they started off at the college level, and that's one that I think is the most striking to start with. So let's go ahead. So this is my last slide, I promise, and then I'll hand it over to questions and kind of some wrap-up items. So talked a lot about fancy education concepts and all that kind of stuff. How can we actually apply this in the world of pathways? So here's just a few cell blocks that we work around a lot here. And it might be good thoughts for anybody designing a new pathway program or a way to kind of think about what you're doing now. So there's many different ways to share this information, but I thought for the purposes of this webinar, it's easy to kind of structure ourselves around 3 different principles, which are a platform, possibilities, and purpose. So, you know, I realize people who are taking, say they're taking a CTE course in robotics at a high school, I imagine that not many people expect students to finish that class and become a certified robotics engineer. This is something that students are going to have to, once they leave school, they're going to have to chart a lot of this progress themselves. They're going to have to find a program that works for them. So I think these create some more realistic frameworks that we can use to judge the efficacy of the potentials that we're opening up for our students. So on the first side, I'll just talk about the platform. So what we like to use that as a mechanism for is what kinds of resources and materials that you have available to make these systems work. So a lot of great pieces to your platform are things that you're already familiar with. So, you know, what kind of teaching resources do you have in the school? How are your educators working now? What kind of criteria, what kind of curricula and certifications are you working with? And what other ancillary materials you're using to work that? So platform is really what's your toolbox and what are people working on top of to get to these different places. So that's what we're looking at there. Possibilities is we like to frame as what kinds of new directions do we want our students to be thinking about when they leave this institution, right? So whether this is some kind of a career plan or it's an industry partnership that can help students think through what their future could be. This is taking the platforms that students have at their school and connecting it with a future opportunity. So there's all kinds of different things that we can unpack there, but ultimately that's what that principle is. And number 3, and what I believe is the most important, is the purpose. So what we like to think of this is what kind of mission are we instilling in our students' hearts and minds so that they know that they're ready to take on these different concepts that we've just introduced. Like, are they building up those cognitive abilities so that they can take on lifelong learning? Are they aware of the resources and the different frameworks that they can use to connect their future learning with whatever their new career should be? What kind of role models can we connect them with? And then ultimately it's about, and you can even see that we use here as marks of success. The biggest mark of success that we see when we have students develop purpose is they're engaging with problems, right? So they're not doing things for the sake of a grade. They're not doing things for the sake of completing a worksheet or finishing their class. They're really interested in solving something bigger. And I think a lot of the things that we can do in our secondary institutions are opening up that mindset and showing students that like you really can connect things that students are doing in the classroom with some kind of a bigger problem that they can solve within their career, whatever that is. So really when students connect that learning with some kind of actual doing. So I won't talk through all this here. I know I've already taken up a lot of time in this webinar, but I'd be happy to revisit this if anybody's interested. Just to kind of summarize what this is all about, we just want to make sure that schools have the resources and the frameworks so that they can present future possibilities and student purpose into what you do. So I think if a pathways program can achieve those things, then it's not so important that students get every single little skill that they need moving into the workforce. What's more important is that they have the right mindset, the right attitude, the right behavior and discipline to take on that stuff as the challenge manifests themselves over the course of a student's career. All right, so I have just talked a lot. Thank you very much for listening. So I'm just gonna take a break for just a moment and say, if you have any questions or anything else that you'd like further elaboration on, or any of your own things that you'd like to share with the group, I'd be more than happy to open up the chat. So let me give you all a chance. If you have any questions about what you're doing now, or what other kinds of cool research is happening in this space, we'll be sending out plenty of materials in our follow-up emails from this webinar that you can use to kind of put these ideas into practice. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more while you might have some more questions, but feel free to type into the chat right now if you have anything else that you want to talk about. Like we've seen a lot of really great research come out about like building up this kind of interest infrastructure for students in secondary environments. There's a lot of really great research out there on when the right time to connect students with certain passions should happen. So what we've seen a lot in the work that we've done is, and this is backed up by the research, that typically middle school is one of the best times that you can start to ignite students with some kind of a post-secondary idea. So whether you're going into a college-going culture or a career-based culture or whatever it is, if you can get students thinking about that and working through that with their parents, especially if their family background doesn't necessarily support that, middle school is the best time to engage learners that way. And typically by the time you reach 10th grade, that's when a lot of these decisions are pretty much already made. And 9th and 10th grade are really about funneling those kind of interests and passions that students have developed so that they can get ready for the next stage in their career. And you can see that actually matches a lot of the practices in secondary institutions at the moment, where a lot of CTE programs will really kick into gear around 11th and 12th grade. So there is a lot of research-based facts that factor into that kind of decision. So, so I have, let's see, got one question here. What kind of pathways do you see with neuroscience? Well, I can give a couple of very broad-based answers. So I think, excuse me, a lot of things that come through this space are like really identifying what those post-secondary careers look like. So for instance, in the field of neuroscience, a lot of this stuff is going to be connected to some kind of a college-going pathway. So we like to work with a lot of programs that are kind of developing college access, and they are helping students with thinking about those future careers. So there are, so a lot of the programs that we offer are doing things like that. I think most of what we've seen are going to be more college-based entrances. However, some of the other things that you can think about are, there's a lot of really interesting work that goes on in neurofeedback clinics. There's some associate programs that people can do in healthcare that can have people become a certified neurofeedback practitioner, or it can be a biomedical technician. So there's some great programs that you can connect with local technical schools and some other certifications that you can get to do that. So I think it's a little bit of a mix. Neuroscience typically focuses a bit more on the college side, but there are some programs too that you can take advantage of that are more at the technical school or kind of industry certification pathway. Okay. All right, so thank you so much for being a part of this webinar with us. I hope you enjoyed the content that we put together here. We're always happy to answer any other questions if you want to reach out to us. So like everybody got a Zoom invite, and like you'll be getting some follow-up emails with some additional information. But feel free to chat with us in case you want to learn anything more. And I hope you had a great time. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Have a great day and have a great time with your students.